The collision. The airport terminal buzzed with its usual chaos. Announcements droned over loudspeakers. Children cried, and travelers with expressions of fatigue dragged their luggage to their gates. Among the commotion, one figure stood out, Dr. Layla Harrington. A black billionaire entrepreneur known for her tech empire, Layla walked with grace and determination through the terminal. Her presence was magnetic. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit and carrying an aura of quiet power. Her confidence, however, was met with both admiration and silent judgment. Layla had just closed a major business deal in New York and was looking forward to her return home in Los Angeles. She'd chosen first class on one of her family's airlines, Skylink International, which her father had acquired recently. For Layla, this trip was supposed to be uneventful, a rare chance to relax after months of negotiations. As she approached the gate, Layla's assistant, Mia, caught up with her, slightly out of breath. They'd just announced boarding for first class, Maya said with a smile, handing Layla her boarding pass. "Have a good flight, Dr. Harrington." Layla gave a nod, grateful for Mia's efficiency, and headed toward the boarding area. As she reached the desk, a young airline employee stopped her with a nervous smile. "Good afternoon, Mom," the employee began. "May I check your boarding pass?" Layla handed it over without hesitation. She was accustomed to the formalities of air travel and thought nothing of it. But when the employee's expression faltered, Layla felt a flicker of unease. "Is there a problem?" Layla asked, her voice calm but firm. The employee hesitated before replying. "I'm sorry, Dr. Harrington, but there's been a mix-up with your seat." Layla raised an eyebrow. "A mix-up?" "Yes, Mom. It seems your seat in first class has already been reassigned." Layla inhaled deeply, holding her composure. "That's impossible. This is a confirmed reservation, and it's my family's airline. Please check again." The employee's nervous glance shifted behind her to the pilot who had just arrived at the gate, Captain Richard Bradley. A tall, middle-aged white man with an air of authority, he was known for his no-nonsense attitude. He approached the counter, immediately taking over the conversation. "What's the hold-up here?" Captain Bradley demanded, looking between the employee and Layla. Layla turned her gaze toward him. "There's no hold-up," she said calmly. "I've been told there's an issue with my seat, which is clearly a mistake." Captain Bradley looked at the boarding pass briefly before shaking his head dismissively. "Your seat was reassigned. You'll have to take another one or wait for the next flight." Layla's heart rate quickened, but she refused to let it show. "Excuse me. This is my confirmed seat. I'm not waiting for another flight, and I'm certainly not being downgraded." Bradley's eyes narrowed. "Look, I don't care who you are or what you think you're entitled to. This plane is under my command, and I've made my decision." The tension thickened as passengers nearby started to take notice. Layla held her ground. "I won't be dismissed like this. You don't even know who you're talking to." "Frankly, I don't care," Bradley shot back, his voice rising. "You're holding up the boarding process, and if you don't step aside, I'll have security escort you out." Layla stood firm, her calm exterior masking the storm brewing inside her. "Call whoever you need," she said, her voice cutting through the air. "But I'm not leaving this gate until I'm seated where I'm supposed to be." Captain Bradley's face darkened, and before anyone could react, he stepped forward and shoved Layla's shoulder with enough force to make her stumble. A collective gasp echoed through the terminal as Layla staggered but managed to catch herself on the counter. For a moment, everything froze. Layla's chest tightened as she processed what had just happened. This wasn't just a mix-up. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a blatant act of aggression, one fueled by disdain and arrogance. Passengers pulled out their phones, recording the scene, while others whispered in disbelief. Layla straightened, her voice calm but icy. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Unfazed, Bradley turned to the stunned employee. "Get security." But before the employee could move, Layla pulled out her phone and dialed a number, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Within seconds, her father's voice came through. "Layla, what's wrong?" "Dad," she said, her voice unwavering. "You need to know what just happened. One of your employees decided to assault a passenger, your daughter, to be exact." The unveiling storm. The commotion at the terminal had simmered down to an eerie silence, broken only by the clicking of phones and hushed murmurs of passengers. Layla stood tall, her phone pressed to her ear as her father's commanding voice came through. Her father, Victor Harrington, was a titan of industry, known for his relentless pursuit of justice and excellence. But he was also a father who valued his daughter above all else. Assault. Victor's voice was laced with controlled fury. "Tell me everything." Layla's tone was even, but her words carried the weight of the moment. "The captain physically shoved me because I refused to give up my seat in first class. He claimed my reservation was invalid, despite my confirmed ticket." Victor paused. Layla knew this was the moment when her father's analytical mind kicked into high gear, calculating the next move. "Are you safe?" he asked. "Yes," Layla replied, her voice steady. "But this isn't just about me. It's about the message this sends. What happens when someone without my resources faces this kind of treatment?" Victor's silence was brief, but Layla could sense his mounting resolve. "I'll handle this," he said. "Don't leave the terminal. Stay visible, and don't engage further. I'm sending a team." Layla ended the call, her pulse steady, but her resolve sharper than ever. Turning to the passengers still gawking, she raised her voice, making sure she was heard. "To those of you recording, make sure you share the truth about what happened here. This isn't just a personal slight. It's systemic." The murmurs grew louder as Layla walked away from the gate, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She found a quiet corner of the terminal, pulled out her laptop, and began drafting a statement. Layla had spent years using her platform to amplify voices that often went unheard. This time, the story was hers, but the implications were universal. Meanwhile, at Skylink International headquarters, Victor Harrington was not a man who wasted time. As soon as the call with his daughter ended, he summoned his executive team and legal advisors. The sleek conference room, with its panoramic view of the city, was abuzz with activity. Victor sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding as always. "Dr. Harrington," began his COO, Evelyn Price, a sharp and no-nonsense woman who had been Victor's right hand for years. "We've received preliminary reports about the incident. Captain Bradley has a history of disciplinary warnings, though nothing of this magnitude." Victor's jaw tightened. "And why is a man with such a record still employed?" Evelyn hesitated. "His union has been protective of him, and his infractions were minor compared to the threshold for termination. However, this incident crosses all lines." Victor leaned forward, his eyes like steel. "I don't care about unions or thresholds." He laid hands on my daughter, on a passenger who paid for a service. That alone is grounds for dismissal, and we're going to make it happen. The head of public relations, Simon Langley, cleared his throat. "Sir, the incident is already making waves on social media. The video has gone viral, and the hashtags #JusticeForLayla and #AirLineracism are trending." Victor's gaze shifted to Simon. "Good. Let it trend. I want the world to see what happens when someone abuses their power." Simon blinked, taken aback. "Shouldn't we control the narrative? Release a statement, maybe?" Victor cut him off. "No. We let Layla speak first. This isn't about damage control. It's about accountability. Draft a statement acknowledging the incident, but keep it concise. The world needs to hear her voice, not some sanitized corporate apology." Simon nodded, jotting down notes, while Victor turned to his legal team. "I want an investigation launched immediately. Review every piece of footage, every witness account, and prepare for litigation. We're not settling. This is about setting a precedent." Back at the terminal, Layla's laptop screen was filled with her words, a powerful statement about the intersection of race, privilege, and power. As she typed, an older black woman approached her cautiously. She held a phone in her hand, its camera still recording. "Miss Harrington," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I just want to say thank you. What you're doing here, it means a lot. My daughter looks up to women like you, and seeing you stand up like this, it gives me hope." Layla paused, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you," she replied. "But this isn't just my fight. It's all of ours. Together, we can make sure no one else has to go through this." The woman nodded, tears welling in her eyes, and walked away. Layla took a deep breath and hit send, publishing her statement across her social media platforms. Within minutes, her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Comments of support poured in, along with offers of help from activists, influencers, and even lawmakers. The flight crew learns the truth. Captain Bradley, oblivious to the magnitude of his actions, was still in the cockpit preparing for the flight's departure when the intercom crackled. "Captain Bradley," came a voice, stern and clipped. "You're required to disembark immediately." Bradley frowned, his irritation clear. "What now?" he muttered under his breath as he exited the cockpit. He was met by two senior airline officials, their expressions grim. "What's this about?" Bradley asked, his tone impatient. One of the officials, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, handed Bradley a tablet. "This is the passenger you removed from first class," he said. Bradley glanced at the screen, and his face paled as he saw Layla's profile. Her name was listed alongside a brief summary of her achievements, including her ties to Skylink International. "Dr. Layla Harrington," the official continued, "is not only a prominent entrepreneur, but the daughter of Victor Harrington, majority owner of this airline." Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I didn't know." "It's too late for excuses," the official snapped. "You're suspended effective immediately. HR will contact you for further proceedings." The aftermath begins. As Bradley was escorted from the plane, passengers began whispering, their eyes glued to their phones as news of the incident flooded their feeds. Layla's story was everywhere, accompanied by a short but powerful video statement. "My experience today wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about power dynamics and the prejudice that's still deeply ingrained in our society. This isn't just my fight, it's all of ours. Together, we can demand change." The message resonated far and wide, sparking debates on news channels, in households, and across social media. Skylink International, under Victor's leadership, issued a statement acknowledging the incident and pledging a transparent investigation. Captain Bradley's career hung in the balance, while Layla's determination to use her platform for change grew stronger by the minute. But for her, this was only the beginning. The storm she had unleashed wasn't just about her. It was about exposing the systemic injustices that millions faced every day. The fallout. The events of the day had unraveled faster than anyone could have predicted. What began as a humiliating encounter at an airport terminal had snowballed into a full-blown cultural and corporate crisis. Dr. Layla Harrington's name was on every major news outlet and across social media platforms. Her video statement, shared by millions, had ignited a global conversation about systemic racism, abuse of power, and accountability. Inside Skylink International headquarters, Victor Harrington sat in the executive conference room, surrounded by his legal and PR teams. The tension in the room was palpable. Screens displayed news channels reporting on the incident in real time, while Victor's assistants buzzed in and out with updates. The Skylink logo on the wall seemed almost ironic now, a symbol of a company that claimed to connect people, yet had become the face of division and discrimination. Evelyn Price, Victor's COO, broke the silence. "Sir, we've confirmed the video has over 10 million views across platforms. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly in support of Layla, but the backlash against Skylink is escalating." Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Good. he said calmly, catching everyone off guard. Let it escalate. Simon Langley, the head of PR, looked puzzled. With all due respect, sir, we're in damage control mode. Letting this escalate cold. Victor raised a hand to stop him. This isn't just about managing a PR disaster, Simon. This is about setting a precedent. I'm not interested in sweeping this under the rug. We need to expose the rot in the system, even if it means taking a hit. Simon hesitated before nodding. Victor's unorthodox approach was daunting, but he couldn't deny its potential to transform Skylink's public image. Not as a company avoiding accountability, but as a beacon for change. Evelyn spoke again, her tone cautious. We've also uncovered more about Captain Bradley's history. He's had multiple complaints for inappropriate behavior, racially insensitive comments, power abuse, and even minor altercations with staff. His union has shielded him, but this incident is the tipping point. Victor's gaze sharpened. Compile everything. I want a full report on his record and every failure in the system that allowed him to stay employed. We'll make it public. The room fell silent, the weight of Victor's directive sinking in. This wasn't just about Captain Bradley anymore. It was about dismantling the systems that enabled people like him. Layla's next move. In a private corner of the airport lounge, Layla sat with her attorney, Marissa Campbell, a formidable woman in her 50s with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. Marissa had been Layla's legal counsel for years. Together, they had navigated hostile business takeovers, lawsuits, and the occasional smear campaign. But this felt different. This isn't just a case of physical assault, Marissa said, her pen tapping against her legal pad. This is about racial discrimination, abuse of power, and public humiliation. The fact that it happened in such a public space only strengthens our position. Layla nodded, her expression thoughtful. I don't want this to just be about me, Marissa. This isn't just my fight. I want to use this to shed light on what so many others go through. People who don't have the resources or the platform I do. Marissa smiled faintly. You're turning this into a movement. It already is. Layla replied. I'm just amplifying it. Marissa made a few notes. We'll pursue charges against Bradley personally, assault, and discrimination. As for Skylink, I'd suggest working with your father. He's already mobilized his resources. Layla exhaled deeply, her mind racing. Her father's involvement was both a relief and a burden. Victor Harrington was a force to be reckoned with, but his methods could be overwhelming. Still, she trusted him implicitly. Bradley's realization. Captain Bradley sat in a sterile conference room at Skylink's headquarters, facing a panel of HR representatives and union lawyers. His face was flushed, and his demeanor oscillated between defensiveness and disbelief. This is ridiculous, he snapped. I've served this airline for over 20 years. That passenger was out of line. I was doing my job. Karen Michaels, the head of HR, leaned forward. Her tone was icy. Captain Bradley, this isn't just about enforcing protocol. You physically assaulted a passenger. And that passenger happens to be Dr. Layla Harrington, a high-profile entrepreneur and daughter of our majority shareholder. Bradley's face paled. I didn't know who she was. That's irrelevant, Karen shot back. Your actions were unprofessional, inappropriate, and entirely unacceptable. And it's not just this incident. Your record is riddled with complaints, many of which should have led to disciplinary action long before now. Bradley leaned back in his chair, his confidence eroding. So what happens now? Karen's expression hardened. You've been suspended pending termination. Skylink's legal team is also cooperating with Dr. Harrington's attorney. If she chooses to press charges, and she will, you'll face them without the airline's protection. Bradley opened his mouth to protest, but found no words. His career, his reputation, everything he had built was crumbling before his eyes. The public reacts. Outside the corporate offices and private meetings, the world was on fire. Protesters gathered at Skylink terminals nationwide, holding signs that read, "Justice for Layla," and end airline racism. Celebrities, politicians, and activists weighed in, amplifying Layla's message and demanding systemic change. News anchors dissected the video footage, experts debated the broader implications, and ordinary people shared their own stories of discrimination in the airline industry. Layla's name had become a rallying cry. Despite the chaos, Layla remained composed. She continued to use her platform to address the issue, appearing on talk shows and participating in panel discussions. Her calm demeanor and eloquence only bolstered her credibility. "This isn't about revenge," she told one host. "It's about accountability. Captain Bradley's actions are a symptom of a larger problem, a system that allows people like him to wield their authority unchecked. If we don't address the root causes, this will keep happening." Victor's vision. Back at Skylink HQ, Victor unveiled his plan to his executive team. "We're not just responding to this crisis," he said. "We're using it as a turning point. Skylink will lead the charge in reforming the airline industry." He outlined a series of measures: mandatory bias training for all employees, an independent review board for complaints, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. He also announced a partnership with organizations advocating for racial equality and fair treatment in the workplace. "This isn't just about repairing Skylink's reputation," Victor said. "It's about setting a standard for the industry. We will be the example others follow, or the example they fear." The turning point. As the dust began to settle, Layla found herself at the center of a movement much larger than she had anticipated. Her fight for justice had become a symbol of resistance against systemic oppression. But for her, this was just the beginning. The storm wasn't over yet. Captain Bradley had yet to face legal consequences, and Skylink's reforms were still in their infancy. But for the first time, Layla felt hopeful. She had turned a moment of humiliation into a catalyst for change, and she wasn't done yet. The reckoning. The morning air was crisp as the sun rose over Skylink International's corporate headquarters. Outside, protesters gathered, their chants echoing across the parking lot. Signs with phrases like "Justice for Layla" and "Accountability Now" waved in the air, a testament to the movement that had erupted in the wake of the incident. Inside the building, the atmosphere was equally tense. The boardroom was filled with Skylink executives, attorneys, and PR specialists. Victor Harrington sat at the head of the table, his demeanor calm, but his eyes sharp. He wasn't here to play defense. He was here to lead the charge. The case against Bradley. In a smaller room down the hall, Captain Richard Bradley sat with his union representative, his face a mixture of defiance and fear. Across the table were Skylink's HR team and legal counsel. The room's air was heavy with tension as Karen Michaels, the head of HR, spoke. "Captain Bradley," she began, her tone measured but firm. "We've reviewed the footage and the witness statements from the incident involving Dr. Harrington. The evidence is clear. You violated not only Skylink's policies, but also basic standards of professionalism and respect." Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I already told you," he said defensively. "I didn't know who she was. She was being disruptive, and I acted to maintain order." Karen's expression hardened. "Whether or not you knew who she was is irrelevant. You used physical force against a passenger, a decision that was not only unnecessary, but completely unjustifiable. This isn't about maintaining order. It's about your inability to treat all passengers with the respect they deserve." The union representative interjected. "With all due respect, Captain Bradley has a spotless flight record and over 20 years of service. This incident is being blown out of proportion because of Dr. Harrington's status." Karen raised an eyebrow. "A spotless flight record? That's not what our investigation shows." She slid a thick folder across the table. "This is a compilation of every complaint filed against you during your tenure. Racially insensitive comments, inappropriate behavior, and an ongoing pattern of abusing your authority. Your record is far from spotless." Bradley's face reddened as he glanced at the folder, but refused to open it. He was cornered, and he knew it. Our decision is final, Karen continued. Effective immediately, you are terminated from Skylink International. Furthermore, Dr. Harrington's legal team has initiated proceedings against you personally. I suggest you retain your own counsel. Bradley's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself. The weight of his actions, and their consequences, finally began to sink in. Layla's rallying cry. Across town, Layla Harrington stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium. The event, organized by activists and community leaders, was both a rally and a press conference. Layla had been invited to speak as the face of the growing movement for racial equality in corporate spaces. As she stepped up to the microphone, the crowd erupted into applause. Layla raised a hand, signaling for quiet, and began to speak. "Thank you," she said, her voice strong and steady. "Thank you for standing with me, not just for what happened to me, but for what this incident represents." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "This isn't just about a seat on an airplane. It's about a system that tells people like me, like us, that we don't belong. It's about the countless individuals who face discrimination every day, but don't have the platform to fight back." The crowd murmured in agreement, their energy palpable. Captain Bradley's actions were unacceptable, but they are not unique. Layla continued. They are part of a larger issue, a culture that allows prejudice to go unchecked, that allows power to be wielded without accountability, and that is what we're here to change. The room erupted into cheers, but Layla wasn't finished. "My father and I are working to implement reforms at Skylink International, but this is bigger than one company. It's about industries, institutions, and attitudes that need to change. And we won't stop until they do." The applause was deafening as Layla stepped back from the podium. She felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a movement. Victor's plan unfolds. Back at Skylink, Victor Harrington convened a meeting with his executive team to discuss the next steps. He stood in front of a large screen displaying a slide deck titled Operation Reform, a new era for Skylink International. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor began, his voice commanding, "we are not here to salvage Skylink's reputation. We are here to rebuild it from the ground up." He clicked to the first slide, which outlined a series of initiatives. First, we will implement mandatory bias training for all employees, from the ground crew to the executive team. This isn't a one-time workshop. It's an ongoing program designed to challenge assumptions and foster inclusivity. He clicked to the next slide. Second, we will establish an independent review board to handle all complaints. This board will be composed of external experts to ensure objectivity and transparency. The room buzzed with murmurs, but Victor pressed on. Third, we will launch a scholarship program for underrepresented communities, creating pathways for more diversity in the aviation industry. Evelyn Price raised her hand. "Victor, these are ambitious goals. How do we fund all of this?" Victor smiled faintly. "We're reallocating a portion of our marketing budget. Right now, the best marketing Skylink can have is proving that we're serious about change." The legal showdown. A few days later, the legal proceedings began. Layla's attorney, Marissa Campbell, faced off against Bradley's newly hired lawyer in a packed courtroom. The case was as much about justice for Layla as it was about sending a message. Marissa's opening statement was powerful. "This case is not just about Dr. Layla Harrington. It's about accountability. Captain Bradley abused his authority, violated her rights, and exemplified the systemic issues we need to confront." The courtroom was silent as Marissa laid out the evidence. The video footage, witness testimonies, and Bradley's history of complaints. It was a damning case, and Bradley's defense struggled to counter it. Layla watched from her seat, her father beside her. She felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also hope. This was the beginning of something bigger than her. The ripple effect. As the trial gained national attention, other individuals began sharing their stories of discrimination in the airline industry. Social media was flooded with hashtags like #FlyFair and #EqualSkis, Skylink's competitors were forced to reevaluate their own policies, fearing similar scandals. For Layla, the victory wasn't just in the courtroom, it was in the conversations that were finally happening. She had turned her pain into power, and the world was listening. A movement takes flight. The courtroom's heavy oak doors swung open as Layla Harrington stepped out, flanked by her attorney, Marissa Campbell, and her father, Victor. The gathered crowd erupted into cheers, cameras flashing, and microphones thrust toward her. Despite the chaos, Layla exuded composure. This moment wasn't just about her victory. It was about the beginning of a larger fight. The verdict and its impact. The judge's decision had been swift and decisive. Captain Richard Bradley was found guilty of misconduct and racial discrimination. Additionally, Skylink International was ordered to pay damages for failing to address systemic issues that allowed such behavior to persist. While Bradley's personal accountability was celebrated, the focus quickly shifted to Skylink's broader responsibility. Outside the courthouse, Layla addressed the crowd. "This ruling is a step forward, but it's only the beginning," she began, her voice carrying over the chatter. "Today's victory is not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been dismissed, disrespected, or dehumanized because of the color of their skin." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We are not here to destroy institutions. We are here to rebuild them. Fairer, stronger, and more inclusive. Skylink has committed to change, and I will hold them to it. But this movement isn't just about one company. It's about creating a society where everyone feels they belong." The crowd roared in support, and Layla stepped back, her father's reassuring hand on her shoulder. Skylink's transformation. In the weeks following the trial, Skylink International unveiled its comprehensive reform plan. Victor Harrington, true to his word, had mobilized the company's resources to lead the industry in addressing systemic discrimination. The reforms were ambitious and groundbreaking. Mandatory bias training. Every employee, from entry-level staff to executives, attended immersive workshops designed to confront unconscious bias and foster empathy. These sessions weren't optional, and employees who refused faced termination. Independent Review Board. The newly formed board comprised experts in diversity, human rights, and corporate ethics. They were tasked with reviewing all complaints and ensuring impartial resolutions. Diversity scholarships. Skylink partnered with aviation academies to offer scholarships to underrepresented communities. The goal was to diversify the industry, from pilots and engineers to corporate leadership. Employee accountability. A new policy enforced strict consequences for discriminatory behavior, including immediate suspension and review by the independent board. Public transparency. Skylink committed to publishing annual reports detailing the company's progress on diversity and inclusion metrics. The initiatives were met with mixed reactions. Activists praised the bold steps, while skeptics questioned their authenticity. But Victor and Layla knew that true change would take time and relentless effort. Layla's new mission. Layla found herself at the helm of a burgeoning movement. Invitations poured in for her to speak at universities, corporate events, and international forums. She embraced her role, not just as a business leader, but as an advocate for systemic change. One evening, as she prepared for a keynote address at a global diversity summit, her assistant Mia handed her a thick envelope. "This came from someone on Skylink's ground crew," Mia explained. "He said it was important." Curious, Layla opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter from a man named Marcus, a Skylink baggage handler who had worked for the company for over 15 years. His words stopped her in her tracks. "Dr. Harrington, I've seen people like me pushed aside my whole life. When I heard what happened to you, I thought, what chance do I have if someone like her can be treated that way? But now, seeing what you've done, I feel hope for the first time in years. Thank you for fighting for us." Layla read the letter twice, her chest tightening. This was why she had to keep going. For Marcus, for others like him, and for the countless voices still unheard. Bradley's downfall. Richard Bradley's life had unraveled quickly after the trial. His termination from Skylink had effectively ended his aviation career, and the legal ruling tarnished his reputation. But the consequences extended beyond his professional life. Public backlash was relentless. His actions had become a cautionary tale, dissected on talk shows and social media. While some sympathized with him, many others condemned his behavior as emblematic of systemic privilege and unchecked power. Sitting alone in his small suburban home, Bradley scrolled through articles and comments, his name attached to words like racist and disgraced. For the first time, he was forced to confront the reality of his actions, but self-awareness came slowly, overshadowed by bitterness and denial. The broader ripple effect. Skylink's reforms had a ripple effect throughout the airline industry. Competitors scrambled to review their own policies, fearing similar public relations disasters. Several airlines announced their own diversity initiatives, though many were criticized as performative. Layla, however, wasn't interested in performative gestures. She worked closely with advocacy groups to hold companies accountable, ensuring their promises translated into tangible change. Her efforts extended beyond the airline industry, reaching into tech, finance, and other sectors where systemic discrimination persisted. A family united. One evening, Layla sat with her father on the balcony of his sprawling estate. The city skyline glittered in the distance, a testament to the world they were working to change. Victor handed her a glass of wine, his expression softening as he studied his daughter. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. Layla smiled, though her gaze was distant. "It feels like there's still so much to do." "There always will be," Victor replied. "But you've already done more than most people dream of, and you're just getting started." Layla looked at him, her resolve firm. "I couldn't have done it without you." Victor shook his head. "No, Layla. This was all you. I'm just here to remind you of what you're capable of." The path forward. Months later, as Skylink celebrated the first anniversary of its reforms, Layla stood on a stage before a crowd of employees, stakeholders, and media. Behind her, a screen displayed the company's new slogan, "Taking flight together." "This past year has been transformative," she said. "But transformation isn't a destination, it's a journey. We've made progress, but the work continues. My promise to you, and to everyone watching, is that we will not stop. We will not rest until every passenger, every employee, and every human being is treated with the dignity they deserve." The applause was thunderous. Layla stepped back, her heart full. She had turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change. And though the road ahead was long, she knew she wasn't walking it alone. Legacy in the making. The cold wind cut through the crowd gathered outside Skylink International's headquarters. It had been a year since the incident involving Layla Harrington and Captain Richard Bradley shook the aviation industry. The event had since become a case study in corporate accountability, systemic reform, and the power of individual action. Inside the Skylink auditorium, employees and guests buzzed with anticipation. The anniversary celebration wasn't just a corporate event, it was a symbolic moment of reflection and progress. Journalists from major outlets sat in reserved rows, their pens poised and cameras ready. On stage, a large screen displayed the words, "Beyond the Horizon, Building an Inclusive Future." Layla stood backstage, adjusting the microphone on her lapel. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes filled with determination. Today was more than just a speech. It was a declaration of what she and Skylink had achieved, and a promise of what was yet to come. The weight of change. Layla had spent the past year immersed in Skylink's transformation. The reforms her father spearheaded, combined with her relentless advocacy, had reshaped the company's culture. Employees from marginalized backgrounds felt empowered to speak up, knowing there was now a robust system to support them. Skylink's scholarship program had already funded training for dozens of aspiring pilots, engineers, and flight attendants from underrepresented communities. But the journey hadn't been without challenges. Skepticism had been a constant obstacle. Critics claimed Skylink's efforts were performative or motivated solely by the need to repair its reputation. Competitors whispered that the reforms were unsustainable. Even within Skylink, resistance lingered among some employees, particularly those who saw the changes as a threat to the status quo. Despite this, Layla remained steadfast. She had faced resistance before: subtle discrimination in boardrooms, outright bias in negotiations, and now skepticism about her intentions. But each challenge only strengthened her resolve. Bradley's quiet exile. Far from the spotlight, Richard Bradley's life had descended into obscurity. After his termination, he retreated to a small coastal town, avoiding the media frenzy that followed the trial. His name had become synonymous with unchecked privilege and systemic bias, a cautionary tale of how prejudice could dismantle even the most established careers. Bradley spent his days in isolation, haunted by memories of the incident. He watched from afar as Layla's advocacy gained momentum, her face appearing on every major news outlet. At first, he resented her, convinced she had overreacted. But over time, as he read more about her work and the stories of others who had faced similar injustices, a flicker of self-awareness began to emerge. One afternoon, as he walked along the shoreline, he overheard a group of young people discussing Layla Harrington. They spoke about her resilience, her ability to turn pain into progress, and the movement she had sparked. For the first time, Bradley felt the weight of his actions, not as a loss of his career, but as a betrayal of his responsibility as a leader. A global platform. Layla's fight for systemic reform had extended far beyond Skylink. She had become a sought-after speaker at international conferences, addressing issues of racial equity, corporate accountability, and leadership. Her speeches were a blend of personal anecdotes and calls to action, resonating with audiences across industries. One of her most impactful appearances was at the United Nations Global Equality Summit. Standing before world leaders and activists, Layla delivered a speech that would later be quoted in textbooks and memorialized in documentaries. "We cannot dismantle systems of oppression with silence," she said, her voice clear and resolute. "It takes courage to confront what is uncomfortable, to challenge what is entrenched, and to rebuild what is broken. But courage alone is not enough. We need action, persistent, unrelenting action." Her words were met with a standing ovation, solidifying her position as a global advocate for change. Skylink's transformation in action. Back at Skylink, the reforms were bearing fruit. The independent review board had resolved dozens of complaints, setting a new standard for transparency. The scholarship program had doubled its intake, with its first graduates preparing to join Skylink's workforce. Employee surveys showed a significant increase in job satisfaction and trust in leadership. Victor Harrington, proud but ever pragmatic, remained focused on sustaining the momentum. In a private meeting with Layla, he expressed his concerns. "Reform is easy to start," he said. "The challenge is maintaining it. People have short memories. When the spotlight fades, we have to ensure the systems we've built don't falter." Layla nodded. "That's why we need to embed these changes into the company's DNA. It can't just be policy, it has to be culture." Victor smiled faintly. "That's why I know Skylink is in good hands." Layla's eyes widened. "Wait, what do you mean?" Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. "I'm stepping down as chairman at the end of the year. I've done what I set out to do. Now it's time for the next generation to lead." Layla stared at him, stunned. "You're handing Skylink to me?" "Who else?" Victor said with a chuckle. "You've proven you can handle it. This isn't just about running an airline, Layla. It's about leading an industry." The anniversary celebration. As Layla stepped onto the stage at Skylink's anniversary event, the audience erupted into applause. She took a moment to absorb the energy of the room before beginning her speech. "A year ago, Skylink faced a crisis," she said, her voice steady. "It was a moment that forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about who we were and who we wanted to be. Today, we stand here not as a company that has overcome its challenges, but as one that continues to evolve. She gestured to the screen behind her, which displayed images of scholarship recipients, diverse crews, and community outreach programs. This is what progress looks like. It's not perfect, and it's never complete, but it's real, and it's ours. The crowd cheered, but Layla wasn't finished. Our work isn't done. This isn't just about Skylink. It's about setting a precedent for every industry, every institution, and every individual. Change is possible, but only if we have the courage to pursue it. As she stepped away from the podium, Victor joined her on stage. Together, they accepted a standing ovation, a symbol of the journey they had undertaken and the legacy they were building. Looking beyond the horizon, that evening, as Layla stood on the balcony of her father's estate, she gazed at the city lights stretching into the distance. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and resistance. But for the first time, she felt ready. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mia. Another invitation, this time for a global equity panel. Want me to accept? Layla smiled and typed a response. Yes. Let's keep moving forward. As she looked out at the horizon, Layla knew one thing for certain. The fight for equality wasn't a moment, it was a movement, and she was ready to lead it. Closing the circle, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, Layla sat with Victor on the balcony, sipping tea. They had spent the day reflecting on their journey, the trials they had endured, and the victories they had achieved. But Layla's mind was elsewhere, thinking of the future. You've built an empire, Dad, she said, breaking the silence. I'm just not sure I'm ready to step into your shoes. Victor chuckled, setting his cup down. It's not about stepping into my shoes, Layla. It's about wearing your own. You've already proven you're capable. The changes at Skylink, that was you. The movement you've sparked, that's all you. You're not inheriting my legacy. You're creating your own. Layla nodded, though her doubts lingered. But what if I fail? What if all of this crumbles under me? Victor leaned forward, his gaze steady. You won't fail. And even if you stumble, remember that progress isn't linear. What you've built is bigger than any single person. The systems you've created, the people you've inspired, they'll carry it forward, no matter what. Layla felt a sense of calm settle over her. For the first time, the weight of responsibility felt less like a burden and more like an opportunity. The final trial. The following week, Skylink hosted a public forum to address its year-long transformation. Employees, stakeholders, and passengers were invited to share their thoughts and ask questions about the company's progress. Layla stood at the center of the stage, flanked by Skylink's leadership team. The room was filled with a mix of emotions, skepticism, hope, and cautious optimism. A young woman in the audience raised her hand. Dr. Harrington, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I followed your story since the beginning. You've accomplished so much, but do you ever feel like it's enough? Like the fight is over? Layla smiled gently. That's a great question, she replied. The truth is, I don't think the fight is ever truly over. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting. Change is a constant process, and every step we take matters. It's not about reaching a finish line. It's about making progress every day. The audience erupted into applause, and the young woman smiled, visibly moved. Another hand went up. This time, it was an older man, Marcus, the baggage handler who had sent Layla the heartfelt letter. Layla recognized him immediately, and her smile widened. Dr. Harrington, Marcus said, his voice strong. I've worked here for over 15 years, and for most of that time, I felt invisible. But because of you, I feel seen. I just wanted to say thank you for fighting for us, for giving people like me a voice. Layla's throat tightened, and she blinked back tears. Thank you, Marcus, she said, her voice filled with emotion. Your voice matters, and it always will. A new era. As the forum concluded, Layla felt a profound sense of closure. Skylink had become more than just an airline. It was now a symbol of resilience, accountability, and progress. And while the journey was far from over, Layla knew the company was on the right path. Later that night, Skylink's leadership team gathered for a private dinner to celebrate their achievements. Victor raised a glass, his eyes gleaming with pride. "To Layla," he said, his voice booming, "for turning adversity into opportunity and for showing us all what true leadership looks like." Everyone raised their glasses, cheering. Layla felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the recognition, but for the team that had stood by her side through it all. The epilogue. Months later, Layla officially took over as Skylink's CEO, ushering in a new era for the airline. Under her leadership, the company continued to innovate and expand its commitment to social responsibility. Skylink became a model for other corporations, proving that ethical leadership and profitability could coexist. The movement Layla had sparked also grew beyond Skylink. Industries across the globe began adopting similar reforms, inspired by her unwavering determination. Layla frequently spoke at conferences, authored books on leadership and equity, and mentored young leaders who sought to make a difference. One day, as Layla prepared for yet another keynote address, she received an email from Marcus. Attached was a photo of him in a newly designed Skylink uniform, beaming with pride. "Dr. Harrington, I just wanted you to know, I've been promoted to supervisor. It's because of the culture you've helped create. Thank you for everything." Layla smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She replied simply, "Congratulations, Marcus. Keep leading the way." As she stepped onto the stage, the applause of thousands greeted her. Layla Harrington stood tall, a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of resilience. She had turned a moment of pain into a movement of progress, and her journey was far from over. Final words. The story of Layla Harrington and Skylink International became more than just a headline. It became a legacy. It reminded the world that even in the face of adversity, change is possible. And while the fight for equality and justice is ongoing, leaders like Layla proved that with courage, vision, and action, a brighter future is within reach. The end, but also a beginning.